What happens when human hunger becomes so infinite that it devours light itself? Tonight I'm sharing the account of David Chen, a physics professor from MIT, who discovered that some appetites can literally consume reality. This isn't about food. It's about what happens when the human soul develops an event horizon. David Chen had always been fascinated by the concept of infinite density. As a theoretical physicist, he spent his days calculating the mathematics of black holes, never imagining he would become one. It started innocently enough. A research project on dark matter that required him to work late nights in his laboratory, surrounded by particle accelerators and quantum field equations. The first sign something was wrong came during a faculty meeting. David noticed how conversations seemed to bend around him. Colleagues who started speaking normally would find their words trailing off mid-sentence when they looked his way. Their voices would stretch, becoming deeper, slower, until they fell into an uncomfortable silence. At first, he attributed it to social awkwardness. Academic circles were notorious for their peculiar dynamics. But then the coffee incident happened. David had been working for 72 hours straight, surviving on nothing but caffeine and determination. As he reached for his cup, something extraordinary occurred. The coffee didn't just spill, it curved in midair, forming impossible spirals that defied gravity before being pulled back toward his chest. He watched in horrified fascination as the liquid seemed to disappear into his skin, leaving no stain, no trace of moisture. That night, alone in his apartment, David stood before his bathroom scale. The digital display flickered erratically before settling on a number that made his blood freeze. Error. The scale couldn't register his weight, not because he was too heavy, but because the concept of weight had become meaningless around him. Gravity wasn't pulling him down anymore. It was pulling everything else toward him. His reflection in the darkened window showed something that shouldn't exist. Where his stomach should be, there was a subtle distortion, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. Light bent around that space, creating an optical illusion that made him appear hollow. But hollow wasn't the right word. Empty implied the absence of something. What David saw was the presence of nothing, a concentrated nothingness that was becoming more real than reality itself. The transformation accelerated over the following days. His appetite disappeared completely, replaced by something far more disturbing. He craved weight, mass, substance, not food but the fundamental building blocks of existence. He found himself unconsciously reaching for heavy objects, textbooks, paperweights, even his laptop, and watching them vanish into the growing void in his torso. Students began avoiding his lectures, not because he had become a poor teacher, but because sitting in his classroom felt like being slowly pulled forward by an invisible current. Papers would slide off desks toward the front of the room. Chalk dust would swirl in unnatural patterns around his body. The fluorescent lights would flicker and dim whenever he passed beneath them, as if their photons were being absorbed by something hungry and patient. By the third week, David had stopped pretending this was a medical condition. The mathematics were undeniable. His body had somehow become a localized gravitational anomaly, a point in space where the fabric of reality was folding in on itself. He calculated his Schwarzschild radius and realized with mounting terror that he was approaching the point of no return. The university library became his sanctuary, but even there, the effects were becoming impossible to hide. Books would fall from shelves as he walked past. Students' pens would roll across tables toward him. The very air seemed thicker in his presence, as if molecules were crowding together, seeking the comfort of his gravitational embrace. Elena Rodriguez, a graduate student in astrophysics, was the first to notice the pattern. She had been studying neutron stars when she observed David's effect on her research materials. Her star charts would curl and warp when he approached, the printed images of celestial bodies seeming to migrate across the paper toward his location. She began following him at a distance, documenting the phenomena with scientific precision and growing dread. "Professor Chen," she whispered one evening, cornering him in the empty physics building. "What's your escape velocity?" David's laugh was hollow, echoing strangely in the corridor. "I calculated it this morning, approaching the speed of light." He paused, watching a loose screw from a nearby air vent roll slowly across the floor toward his feet. Soon, not even light will be able to escape me. Elena backed away as she realized the implications. A human being was becoming a gravitational prison, a point in space where information goes to die. But the horror wasn't in the physics, it was in David's eyes. He was still conscious, still aware, trapped inside a body that was methodically consuming the universe one photon at a time. The final transformation began during the spring semester. David's lectures became impossible to attend as students found themselves physically unable to leave the classroom. Not because the doors were locked, but because the gradient of space-time around David had become so steep that movement away from him required enormous energy. His voice, when he spoke, arrived at different times depending on where students sat, creating an unsettling echo chamber of temporal displacement. Campus security found the physics building empty except for David, standing alone in Lecture Hall B, surrounded by floating objects in perfect orbital patterns. Pencils, erasers, cell phones, and backpacks circled him like a miniature solar system. But most disturbing of all were the shadows, dark spaces in the air where light simply ended, absorbed by the hungry void that David had become. He tried to speak, to warn them, but his words emerged stretched and redshifted, barely recognizable as human language. Time moved differently around him now. What felt like seconds to David were hours to the outside world. He was becoming isolated not just in space, but in time itself. Elena was the last person to see him as anything resembling human. Through the reinforced glass of the physics building's entrance, she watched David's final moments of recognizable existence. His form began to compress, not shrinking exactly, but becoming more concentrated, denser, until the boundaries between David Chen the man and David Chen, the gravitational singularity, became indistinguishable. The university officially reported his disappearance as a mental health crisis. But Elena knew better. David hadn't gone anywhere. He was still there, in Lecture Hall B, existing as a point of infinite density and zero volume. Sometimes, late at night, when the campus was empty, she could hear the building creaking under impossible stresses. The fluorescent lights in that corridor never worked properly again. And occasionally, just occasionally, she would find objects in her lab that didn't belong there, items that had somehow migrated across campus, drawn by the patient hunger of a man who had learned to eat reality itself. The scariest part wasn't that David had become a monster. It was that somewhere inside that cosmic aberration, the consciousness of a physics professor still existed, aware and thinking, forever calculating the mathematics of his own impossible existence while slowly, inevitably, consuming everything he had once studied and loved. If this story left you questioning the nature of reality and human consciousness, smash that like button and subscribe for more cosmic horror that challenges everything you thought you knew about existence. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt like your appetite for knowledge or experience was becoming dangerously infinite? What would happen if our deepest hungers became literally gravitational forces? Ring that notification bell, because next week, we're diving into the account of a woman whose dreams began rewriting the physical laws of her neighborhood.